Hey everyone, welcome to this month's podcast topic where we discuss employee retention. Welcome. How do you keep good employees? This recording is the exclusive property of Real Estate Closing Path. All video files and commentary shared during this session belong to RECP and may be used in future trainings or marketing promotions. And in case you're new here, a little bit about who we are. We are the third branch in a suite of organizations owned by one woman, Marianne Harris. She started in the industry 25 years ago with Positively Balanced, which provides third-party escrow account reconciliation services. In 2020, she launched Positively Closed, which provides remote closing support solutions. And we are Real Estate Closing Path. We handle training in all aspects of the closing process. And joining us today, our panel of experts, we have Sandi Donaldson, and she is our expert point of view. She's our lead educator here at Real Estate Closing Path. She has over 40 years of experience in the mortgage and real estate settlement industry. And she's worked with large firms, small firms, and she's really engaged in all aspects of the closing process. She is known for her wit and wisdom and has collaborated on all of the curriculum development and has led instruction for us at Real Estate Closing Path the last several years. Yay. My name is Janis. I represent kind of that outsider perspective because I like to say I'm new to this industry. And full disclosure, I've never been a closer. My background is in education, and I've helped bring some structure around the curriculum development. We have 9 virtual training workshops that we offer monthly. We recently switched from LinkedIn Live to RECP radio podcast. And all of our courses are now accredited in both Georgia and Florida. And I enjoy networking with students, guest speakers, and other leaders in the industry. And then I also want to welcome Pierre Ballone-Glavin, who represents the next generation point of view. She actually graduated from our inaugural RECP class back in 2021. She worked in various locations as pre-closer, closer, post-closer, and then we recently brought her back to be an assistant trainer and also assist with some marketing for RECP. Glad to have you here. All right, diving into our topic today. So, how do you find good people? And then once you have them, how do you keep someone? That's what this topic is all about. So we've learned a few things along the way, and we hope that these tips will help you as well. How do you keep good employees? So Sandi, I'm going to start with you. What are some things you've learned over the course of your career?
Well, everybody, as we know, is different, and people are motivated by different things. So, as the owner, supervisor, boss, we need to find out what drives our people because everybody is not motivated by the same thing. I like to say, I don't like to say it, but it's true. I am not money motivated. I am motivated by other things, which of course my husband says, don't tell your boss that, right? But some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by the environment, their work family, some by the benefits. I just have this job for the insurance. There are those people. And then some people are working to climb the ladder. So we have to find out what is somebody's motivation so that we can reward them appropriately. If you wanted me to work on Saturday at the end of the month, $10,000 wouldn't have done it because my kids got ball games and that's more important to me.
Right. So kind of that work-life balance.
Right. So we have to figure out, okay, if you can do this, then I'll let you have comp time. That was more valuable to me than money. And some people, are motivated by the money or, we'll give you a gift card for a free dinner at some fancy restaurant. Some people are motivated by those kind of things. So we have to learn to know our people.
Right. That's so insightful. I appreciate you saying that. Pierre, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
So yeah, I think it's kind of like the love languages, like some people their love language is physical touch, and some people it's words of affirmation, and everybody is a combination of those things, really. Like nobody's gonna like, to an extent, everybody wants a part of that. It's just what is the predominant factor for you. So it's kind of like your work love language. So definitely I agree. Like when we're looking at this, it's a combination of all of these things. Even if you had, like, if you're a money motivated person, if you had the salary, you had the work environment, but there were no benefits whatsoever, you might still not be a good fit for that, because you need it to some degree. There needs to be a baseline for everybody, but there is something that's more important to you.
Yep. So true. So well said. And I really appreciate you bringing up the love languages here, because I think it definitely can apply in the work, realm. And, in an ideal world, we might say that all of these, best case scenario, you have the best of all of these. But if you can get maybe your top two, or, again, what are those ultimate deciding factors? Probably most of the time it's money, but then for a lot of people, it doesn't matter what you pay them. If it's a terrible work environment or miserable, coworker dynamics, or, something about the office just doesn't work, and yeah, no amount of money is going to make some people stay. So really something to consider. Follow-up question: how do you discover what drives your employee? Do you just straight up ask, or are there other clues? What do you think, Sandy?
Well, I mean, certainly we can observe by the things that they talk about, and the things that they tell us are important to them, and they may not tell us in words,
Yeah.
but they've got pictures of their kids, or of their motorcycle, or their beach vacation, on their desk, so we know what things are important to them, or if they're, you know all business all the time, and they're looking to. So, I mean, certainly we can ask, um, what would be an appropriate compensation for you for these things? And somebody might say, well, time and a half, or somebody might say, well, a day off, or, those kinds of things. So,
Agreed. Or getting
I
to
think
leave
it's
early,
yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
combination of what we observe and what we learn directly, because again, as the supervisor, we have to communicate directly, so we can't be afraid to ask those questions.
Right. I really agree. I think it's a good question to ask even in the interview process, or maybe when it's time for that 90-day review or an annual review. If this is something you've not directly asked in the past, wouldn't hurt to ask it now and just see and make mental notes or actual notes about what's important to your people, and then how are you meeting their needs. Anything else you want to add before we move on? Okay. I love this next slide. So we have a little story to share about a bigger why. What really can motivate someone to stay? So Sandy, would you share your Christmas story?
Sure. And this is, particular to me. So everybody's why is different, but everybody has a purpose for doing what they do. Whether their purpose is, money, or get braces on their kids, or save up for a vacation, or a house, or whatever, or I'm setting myself up for the future, whatever their purpose is, everybody has one. But I had an example of once my firm was closing a transaction for a couple who were first time home buyers, and they were in their 70s. So it was the first time they had bought a home. The husband was retired. The wife was currently working as a night security guard in a large downtown office building. So they didn't have email, so anytime they had to communicate with us, they came to the office. So we got to know them really well, and it was hot, it was summer. And so every time they came, the husband brought us watermelon, because we all know in the South, that's the thing that cools you right off, So we got to know them pretty well. And when we got their package from the lender, as is common, there was a copy of their appraisal in there, which we are all interested to see what they're buying, right? And it was your basic 70s A-frame ranch, with the big windows and the fireplace up the middle. And so I said to the wife, because I'm a Christmas freak, I said, "Oh, that'd be a great place for a big Christmas tree." And so, we were just talking about that, and we went on and they did their closing, and this was like in July or August. And so when it came to be December, she walked in the office one day, unexpectedly, and brought us Christmas cookies and brought me pictures. I hope I can say it without even crying now, of her Christmas tree in that window.
Oh,
And so it was all about a connection that we made,
yeah. It was much deeper than paperwork. It became
right,
personal.
right. And so, sometimes we get frustrated in transactions, and it is an intense business, right? It's highly stressful. Death, divorce, and buying a house. So those are the three most stressful events in the world, according to psychologists. And sometimes buying a house involves death or divorce,
Yeah.
or selling a house. So it's a stressful situation. So we are looking to connect with these people in a way that shows them that we actually do care about them in particular. And it just made me feel, I got the warm fuzzies in a big way, because she knew that I actually cared about her. And so that the relationships are always my why, whether it was a relationship with my family, my coworkers, clients, so that was always it for me. So if we can help people see, again, we talk about zooming out and looking at the big picture. So if we look at the big picture, not this is just check, we got that one closed next. I mean, to some degree, that's the way it is, because we're an assembly line of a variation, but we want people to know that they are individually important to us. And if we can help our employees see that they are doing their job, it becomes, they understand you don't have to work for Doctors Without Borders to have a purpose.
Yeah.
We start to see that what we do has a purpose in people's lives too.
So true. While, in the day-to-day tasks, you might be closing so many files a day or a month. And yet for the people you're serving, this could be a once in a lifetime, dream come true, right? To be a homeowner. So to keep that bigger perspective, I think is also just a great reminder. So I appreciate you sharing this story, Sandy. It's a great one. Pierre, do you have anything you want to add or say?
Yeah, I think it's easy to lose sight of what our industry means to people and the work that we do, what it means to people in the closing office, because it is sometimes contentious and people don't understand and emotions run high for whatever reason. But this is a necessary industry. Houses have to be conveyed. People have to live their lives, and so many memories are held in the house that you live in. So it does make you feel a little bit more connected to the reason why this is happening, the reason this industry exists, and why it's so important in everybody's life, because we spend so much time at home. This is where people create their family memories, and this is where you lay your head every night. So it's special to be a part of that for people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just important to remember that you really are a significant part of someone's story. And so it's easy to get lost in the paperwork or lost in the stress of the moment, but there really is so much more going on for the people on the other side of the deal. So good comment here. I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so we have a few more tips to keep in mind as an employer looking to keep good employees. It's important to keep in mind that the work relationship is a two-way street. And Sandy, I always love to hear your insight on this one. What would you say here?
Well, in going all the way back to, interviewing, um, I used to tell people interview was like a first date. You're trying each other on, and it has to work for both parties. It's not just as a candidate, am I right for you, but are you right for me? Because if it only fits one way, somebody's ultimately going to be unhappy,
Yeah.
And there clearly are things that we don't know until later, right? Like in every relationship, you don't find out everything up front. But
Right.
if we go into it feeling good about it on both sides, we have a
Yeah.
lot better shot of making it work.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that, and that it's so important that it stays a good relationship, right? That it's important to kind of keep that long game in mind, and that it's a continual investing in that partnership, so to speak. So I would think it's true in the workplace as well.
I think that's a good point about going back to the interview. I I think it is a two-way street. So employer is looking for who's going to be a good fit with them, and then us as the employee, we have to represent ourselves correctly. I think there's kind of a culture or the idea around you go into an interview and you promise everything. You promise you can do everything under the sun. You're going to be the hardest working employee they've ever seen. You're going to do XYZ. And then when it actually comes down to it, nobody can function under those conditions. Nobody can be everything all the time and pull 12-hour days every day of the week. That's not realistic and it's not fair. So I think going into the interview without saying you have to promise the moon and the stars and everything, realistic about what we can do in a day. Obviously being positive, saying what, our best, what we can provide for the company is, but not saying that I'm going to be your everything that you need, fire all the other employees because I'm going to take over and be able to complete everything by myself. So being able to represent ourselves in a way that is positive, but not overly, what we say?
Ambitious.
Yeah, not overly ambitious.
Yeah, that's good. There's the phrase that says in marketing to under promise, but over deliver. So we don't want to do the opposite where we have over promised and now we can't live up to certain standards or expectations. And again, like, Sandi had said how it mirrors dating, a lot of making sure it lasts long term is really making sure you've done your due diligence up front. So we would do that on a property. We're going to do that in our work relationship. So it's a two-way street, not just expecting things from employees, but really being mindful of what you're giving as an employer. Okay, good reminders. Another good retention tip, especially I think in our modern culture, offer remote or hybrid schedules if possible. And can you speak to this, Sandi? Is it ever possible?
Sure. I mean, way back when I thought it was not possible. And then in our industry, we've become so web-based
Mhm.
that it certainly is possible. Now, if you're interviewing to be a chef, clearly you cannot do that remotely, you know. So there are jobs where you have to show up and be in person. I do think that the employee has to be realistic about what that involves because just because I'm working remotely doesn't mean I'm not working. You
Right.
know, there are expectations um, and protocols um, because the employer, just like anything else, if I go and have my car washed and then I get it back and it's dirty, I'm upset because I paid for a job I didn't get. And we don't want that to happen with our employers. But I do think that, again, it always goes back to communication, doesn't it? As the employer, we clearly communicate to remote employees what our expectations are, and certainly there are benefits. And I would say that for my generation, and maybe even, Janice, you're a little younger than me, if we were told we had to come to the office to work every day, we'd go, okay, because we don't know any different, right? But younger generations expect that. They expect there to be at least some hybrid options if it's an industry where it's possible. Sometimes it might require some revised thinking on the part of the employer. If I want to attract and retain the best employees, maybe I need to rethink how we work. Is there a different and better way to do it? And as somebody who doesn't like change, I was just saying the idea of having to change the way things work, that sets my teeth on edge because I like things to be the same. But I also want good people.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean we fundamentally change our industry. We don't necessarily change the message or the product, but we might need to revamp the method as we go.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's insightful. And correct me if I'm wrong, does anyone start in the industry working remote, or does it really come with some time and experience? And I would even argue that you've kind of proven your level of discipline and trustworthiness in that realm.
In my experience, it does not start that way. However, I can't say that nobody does that.
Okay.
I don't know, but it makes a good point. Most settlement firms that I'm aware of at least have a period of in-house training.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go to their office for 2 weeks or 30 days, and you know them and they know you, and which is a good thing for remote work all the way around, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you can feel isolated. You need to
Sure.
you need to feel like you have a team behind you, but you
Sure.
also learn the way we do it at our house. um if I went to work for any firm in the country, even with my experience, there would be a learning curve because I don't know how they do it. So,
Sure.
in my opinion, that's the way to go. But I'm not saying that's what everybody does because I honestly can't tell you what everybody does. Pierre, you may
Yeah.
have some insight on that because you had to do it.
Yeah. So in terms of starting off as a remote employee, I have seen options out there in different forums, not as much in the state of Georgia, more in the state of Florida, and some of our surrounding areas. Obviously, having prior experience boosts you up to those possibilities quicker. Not impossible to start from zero and go remote. There're just not as many opportunities and probably not as much leeway in terms of compensation. But if the most important thing to you is having a remote position, salary is not as high on your list, then that could be a really good fit. These employers have to innovate. They have to get on this train because other people are going to do it and take the employees. This is such a huge benefit to people nowadays to have flexibility, to not fight traffic, to be able to be in the comfort of your own home. That is such a huge benefit. People are resistant to it, but they're going to be left behind. Other people are going to come up and do this, and they're going to be able to take those employees with them because this means a lot to them.
Right. It is a big perk, right? When and where possible, right? It may not be every day, all day, every day, but again, even if just a hybrid or even just under special circumstances. For example, I know we kind of mentioned that this appeals to a younger generation, but I'm also mindful of, older people who might be involved with elder care. And so you have, just unique schedules that you're having to work around to meet the needs of loved ones and family members that might be unexpected. And so some flexibility is just going to be required, even if it's just for a season. So it is something to stay open to, and it is something maybe to be open upfront with a potential new hire, that there's some agreement, as someone new to the industry might be thinking, oh, I can work my way into this, or just assume they see it in other industries. So, you as the employer have to be clear and decide up front, is this something you're open to? Is this something you'll allow? Or what are the guidelines and protocols? What would make it a good, win-win for everyone involved? So I appreciate both of your insights here. Anything else you want to add or say? Okay, next tip I also love this one. It's important to have 2 people trained for every task to cover time off, right? When people need vacations, and also those unexpected emergencies, because it's not if it's going to happen, it's when. And what are you going to do? This is something you need to prepare for ahead of time. What are your thoughts on this, Sandy?
Well, certainly we're not talking about having double the employees, but we are talking about having our staff cross-trained, at least to a degree that they can keep the balls in the air. You know, if somebody has a car accident or they wake up and their child is sick, or, those kind of things. And also, people go on vacation, and if they don't, then they're going to burn out. So we need to encourage them to take that time. But I used to hate to go on vacation and come back, and the mess was so great that I almost wish I hadn't gone, because
Yeah.
there was nobody doing my job while I was gone.
Yeah.
So if we have somebody that can at least manage the day to day in different functions while somebody's out, that will keep from discouraging people to take the time they've earned. And also, if you're sick, you don't need to feel bad about that. If your child is sick, if you have some type of family emergency, I mean, life goes on, and work is not all there is to life. And so we need to have people cross-trained so that employees don't feel terrible. I mean, who hasn't drugged themselves into the office sick as a dog? I've taken my children to work when they were sick, and I made them in a pallet in the floor of my office because I couldn't be out,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
It's critical.
So that's not a situation that we want to encourage.
Agreed. I'm reminded of a story because we do have a former student who actually did wind up leaving a firm because they would not accommodate their vacation schedule, even with 6 months notice. And that was enough for this person to walk away and look for employment somewhere else. So again, just another story of what we've seen happen, and how if there had been a little bit more understanding or preparation or agreement coming from the employer, they might still have been able to retain a really good employee. So another word of caution. Pierre, do you have any insights to share?
This is why we train at RECP. This is why we offer training for people, because we know when you're actually in the closing office, it's difficult to make time to train everybody to be able to do every task. When you're working simultaneously, things need to be taken care of. It's difficult to make it happen. So we offer that training so that your employees can all do it without having, these types of emergency situations where somebody has to go out because they have, I don't know, appendicitis. Somebody can take over, and they know how the steps go. Because it's hard to make time in the closing office when you're actually in it. There is not a lot of downtime where you're like, well, I guess today we'll go over title clearance for you. It just doesn't work that way. So another benefit of RECP is that we can be that part for you to train up your employees so that when somebody's out, you do have somebody who can handle it.
That's good. I appreciate you saying that. It's almost like another layer of insurance, not insurance that you would pay for, like car insurance or health insurance, but it is another layer of just ensuring that things continue to run smoothly in your office, and to ensure that your people are happy, that your tasks and responsibility are covered. So it's just another layer of insurance. Right. Good conversation here. Another retention tip: don't reward excellence with more work without compensation. So important. Sandy, what are your thoughts here?
So frustrating. For your reward for doing a great job is more work. Somebody else is not getting it done, and so you're taking up the slack, and your reward for doing that, they get nothing. And the reward that you get is, oh, let me give you part of their work too. So And even in time, if it doesn't even involve another person, in times when it's really busy and we have an extraordinary amount of volume this month that we don't normally have. So it's going to require all hands on deck in a way that we don't customarily have to do. At the very least, acknowledge that,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that people are aware that we're aware that this is an extra, because what happens so often is people go above and beyond, and then that becomes the standard.
Right.
And so now that's what they have to do all the time. And that's not fair. It's, we have to remember as employers to be fair. And, if we see somebody doing more and more and more work, let's have a conversation. How do you feel about this workload? Is it something you can manage with more compensation? Or is it long-term unmanageable for you so that we know we need to hire an additional person or we need to redistribute the workload? Let's have a conversation about that and see what's what, because everybody wants to be heard. They want to feel like you're at least acknowledge their effort.
Right. I think that's so true. We have another story, or I can think of another student who trained with us a few years ago. Same thing, where they were transitioned from pre-closer to closer, which usually comes with more responsibility and higher volume and workload, and yet with no salary increase. And usually a closer position is paid at a higher rate, depending on the circumstances, but typically that's the case. And yet this person was not compensated, so it required another conversation. And I think eventually they were able to come to some agreement. But as an employer, really, you should be offering that up front, or certainly don't be shocked if someone comes to you with that conversation. Be ready. That is a fair conversation for someone to have. Here, any thoughts on this?
We all know what this feels like. You put in your best work and you're so excited and happy about it, and then you are just given more work. It makes you bitter and it makes you not want to work as hard. So that's obviously not what you want as an employer, to basically give like a negative feedback loop. It's negative reinforcement, a punishment. So that's going to make people work not as hard. It's not going to create the environment that you're looking for, to have more productivity, to bring in more business, to make more money for yourself as the employer. So thinking about it that way, I think people get lost in the, oh, this person's working really hard, they can handle more work, that's great, that'll generate more business for me. But it's really going to backfire.
Yeah. Be careful. You risk losing that person, and they might walk out the door and then really leave you high and dry. And how are you going to replace them? So again, be mindful, be wise, and be thoughtful of the employees you do have. Another good reminder, this slide says people often quit bosses, not jobs. So be a great one. And what does that look like, Sandi?
Well, I mean, after 40 plus years in this industry, I've had similar jobs, So the only reason I would leave one for another, and again, remember, for me, it wasn't about money, right? So it was about the climate, the environment. So if you've got either the supervisor or owner or attorney or whomever is negative or indifferent themselves, or if they foster or allow an environment that is that way, then it becomes untenable. I worked in an office where someone in the office was upset about something that they wouldn't even tell me what it was they were upset about, and literally would not speak to me. And so finally I quit. I mean, it was like 6 weeks, not a word, even when I asked a question or made a statement. I addressed this person directly, they refused to speak to me. No, that is not gonna happen. That I'm not doing that every day. So we have to remember that certainly there are responsibilities on the employee side. But for
Right.
today's purposes, we're talking about from the employer side, right?
Right.
So the employee needs to play nice too, for sure.
Yeah.
But, much like in every other relationship, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure any negativity is not coming from me. That it doesn't mean there's not ever a conflict, because you put two people in a room, there's going to be a conflict sometimes.
Right.
But we address it appropriately. We don't scream and yell. We have a conversation. We find out what's at the root of it and together figure out a solution, you know. But we have to remember that, we need to be approachable. So if an employee feels like there's a situation they need to address, they don't need to be afraid of us. You know, we don't need to rule by fear, because it's not third grade, um, because again, our roles are different, but as human beings, we are equal.
Right.
So we need to treat that person like a person,
Yep.
And show them respect. And then if they don't show us respect, that's a problem on their end, and we may have to deal with that. But we just need to remember to be respectful. You don't demand respect, you earn it.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. That's so true. And it's important to lead by example. Or I'm thinking of the phrase servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just being in charge, but being in charge means that you're serving for the good of all.
Mm-hmm.
And all that would be under your authority, whatever that might look like. So it's a good reminder. Pierre, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think a lot of people want to be the boss. That's kind of aspirational for a lot of people. I want to be the one in charge, making all the decisions, calling the shots. But it's really hard to be a great boss. You need a lot of skill, a lot of experience, and a lot of empathy and understanding and ability to see things without bias. It's difficult. It's tough. And we've all had bosses. I know the three of us have had bosses that we would not describe as great bosses because they were emotionally charged or immature, or they just were not good at their jobs. So we can tell as employees, we can tell when a boss knows what they're doing. We can tell when they have the best interest of the employees and the company in mind. It's obvious to all of us. So it is really one of the number one things that we are all looking for. When you're looking for a job, a great boss is really high up there.
Maybe good to remember that your people are always watching you, and what you do and how you lead, or what you say, or, what kind of ethics you live by. So you may think, just that you're in charge and that your employees need to watch their back, but just know that those eyes are on you as well. And so, again, just be aware that people are watching, and you want to be someone that they can respect and someone that they would want to follow in terms of leadership. And then that you're ultimately creating a place and a job and a position where people would want to stay. So I think just one more slide here today on this topic. And this is a great way to wrap up, that people remember how you make them feel, and you want to make people feel valuable, that they're honored as an important part of the team in your office place, that people feel respected, as a person, and that there's just some common, baseline of respect and interaction that everyone can expect to receive in an office place, and that people feel important, that people feel like what they do matters, that people feel heard. What else would you add to this list, Sandi?
Well, I would say that if you've got an employer that's doing all those things, and then you have a problem or a conflict, you've got an employee that says, okay, they did this thing that really ticked me off. But is that my history of my relationship with them? Overall, they don't treat me that way. So this is about something else, So it helps us have perspective and the same way coming from an employer, if your employee is great and you have good communication and you're mutually respectful and all that stuff, and then one day something happens, you go, wow, I need to find out what's going on because that's not like them. Even if it's just a mistake, right? They just make it they didn't, go off on anybody or something like that, but, we made a mistake in a wire amount or something like that. Then we can say, okay, we need to be more careful about that. But certainly the history of our relationship together impacts how we receive what otherwise might be perceived as criticism.
Yeah, that's true. That's another great reminder. And so there needs to be a season and some time of really establishing that positive rapport, laying the solid foundation of a good
Right.
working relationship, to determine, is this hiccup a new pattern that's going to be ongoing problems, or is this just a one-time circumstance related to, other peripheral things going on in someone's life? And that's important to consider from the employer perspective. It's important to consider from the employee perspective. And then you have a much greater chance of being able to work through situations to have a more positive resolve so that it's not a pattern, of problems. So it's good. Pierre, do you have final thoughts here?
I have a couple examples actually. So one time I was working somewhere, we were looking at a file together, and the file had been X'd out. It was an old file that had been canceled. And she was like, why did you X out the file? Never do this. Don't ever do that. And I was basically saying, that wasn't me, might have been somebody else. And she cut me off and was like, it could only have been you. Don't ever say you didn't do that again. Basically, she was like, don't lie. And then about 10 minutes later, she looked in the history of the file and somebody else had done it because it was an old file that had been canceled. It did not matter. It was negligible. But I always remembered how she made me feel about that and the way that she approached that situation. I'd only worked at that place for about a month. So even if I had made that mistake, which was not detrimental to business, it shouldn't have been handled that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in other experiences where I've had working, for Janis and Sandi and everybody here, mistakes happen and everybody is understanding and we move forward with it with a better plan for next time. And I remember how that makes me feel, that mistakes happen, we can all move on, and that we're a team together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you sharing those stories. And I've heard Sandi say this as well, we're people and people make mistakes and everyone would want some grace for that. Again, it might be a different conversation if it's a pattern, if it's an ongoing problem and someone's just not listening or learning through the mistakes that they're making. But start with grace. Start with understanding. Start with making a positive assumption instead of going straight to being harsh or negative, because that's a sure way to push people away and push good employees right out the door. So, good reminder. Sandi, you have anything else you want to share here?
Well, the only thing that I would say is when we are, addressing those things, like Pierre said, I remember how that made me feel. We're addressing the problem, not the person. We're saying, okay, we need to be more careful about this because here's the consequences if that continues to happen, but we don't say, you're an idiot, you can't do it. Like Pierre said, you have to tell the truth. Well, that's accusatory. And while sometimes, like you said, Janis, if it is a pattern, that may be accurate, but it's still not the kindest way to treat somebody. Even if we see, listen, we've talked about this several times and it doesn't seem that you're understanding it. Maybe we need to see if there's a role that you're a better fit for, So, and that's not saying you're terrible. I mean, we had an employee in our company, not in RECP, but in one of our other arms of our company that was a great person and we loved her. But in a couple of different places, she just wasn't a good fit. But she was a valuable enough person to us that we kept trying to find a place to put her. Because we wanted to retain. You can't train integrity. and she had that. So while you might not have the skill for this particular thing, surely there is something in our company you have the skill to do because you're such a great person.
Right.
So we need to look at people like that. Maybe this just isn't a good fit, but do we have somewhere else that would be a good fit for them?
Yeah, I like that. It's important to kind of be solution oriented,
Right.
and to try to think win-win. How can I get what I need and want? How can this employee get what they need and what they want? And what's going to be a good fit for both? So, which kind of brings us right back to where we started, that it's important to have a good partnership, that it's teamwork on all levels. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up our conversation today on retention. And we hope we've been able to share some good tips and good stories for you to think about how it would apply in your workplace. Again, we encourage you to follow us on the various social media platforms. We have a presence on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And again, we offer 9 different workshops monthly, and you can check our calendar on our website. We'd love to assist you and your team with training to help you retain that employee so that they'll feel competent and confident in the task that you've given them to do. So until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.